Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode. I have some time to give a quick episode, and I need to head out after. But a title arose to me, something I felt was noteworthy. And pretty much every day I wake up, I wonder about the dimensions of life, and I wonder about, in some sense, what is the self, what is the activity of the self, what is the activity of the species, and what is the activity of the world. To me, other people have become members of my species, and myself, I have become a member of my species, and the world is in some sense where we all belong. That's one thing that's very, innately known about freedom, that freedom is world access. So in wondering about the self, in wondering about the species, in wondering about the world, I think about the relationship of the dimension of self. And I think about, okay, in the dimension of self, what is happening? And so when it comes to the body, that is obvious. The body is a response to the environment, to its ecosystem. And human beings are such unique animals that we find ourselves in two simultaneous ecosystems. The animals, let's say the evolutionary animal, its information was dependent. Let's say let's say we see a lion in a jungle. That lion's imagination is limited to the jungle. Its decision making is limited to how its environment happens to it. But for human beings, we stepped out of the jungle and we made our own jungle in the jungle. We call that civilization 1.0. Now, the idea is that rather than the world defining us, we have come to define the world. And so, my curiosity for this episode is really, what is the mind doing? The realization I've had, or what I've noticed about it, at least for today, is that the mind is mapping itself. And, when I thought this idea, I'm like, definitely this should be talked about. That what is the mind is not behaving like an individual being. The body is individual, as individual as it gets, But the mind is not behaving individually. And I'm going to bring the notepad and try to explain it here. So one thing I've been naturally doing just since the beginning of my life, and later on I realize it's, in some sense, I've been inducting and deducting naturally. So I guess a sort of method of deduction. Looking at the general and, in some sense, making specific extractions of meaning. So first I'm going to go through the title. Is consciousness mapping itself through memory. Now, this question is interesting because some questions, at least this is my understanding, that just like we look at a particle or we look at something, we don't understand it. What does the scientific method inspire us to do? In some sense, to cut for example, we cut the atom and we discovered, you know, how would I say it? We discover, you know, I don't know why the terms aren't there in my mind right now. Let's say we discover preliminary particles, you know, and then we break those and we discover quarks. And the idea is that something big is made of smaller parts, and so if there's a big question, it is made of smaller questions. So, at least through one person's understanding, I will say, in the question, is consciousness mapping itself through memory? I would say some questions will arise. What is consciousness? How is it mapping itself? And pretty much, what does it mean that something maps itself? And then, I forgot to put the ending, through memory. Oh my god. Okay. Through memory to collectivize. And then, in some sense, what is what is memory? Or memory's purpose? Oh yeah, sorry guys. Earlier I was struggling to find the term subatomic particles. That's and then, you know, from the dance of the proton, neutron, electron, then we have the quarks and whatnot. But anyways, so I've pretty much taken, the title is Consciousness Mapping Itself Through Memory to Collectivize. I've fragmented in some sense to understand each individual element, and then afterwards we're going to see how many ways we can actually see this. Now, actually, I'm going to talk about the title a bit more, and then I'll dive into these questions. So I'll just turn this off for a moment. Or whatever. The notepad doesn't have enough battery. I'll just use it. So, the physical life, let's say the physical life of the human being it's like a person, and there's space, and there's consciousness and unconsciousness. And so there is time. Well, let's just call this time. Space is just a given. We have person A, we have A1, A2, A3, A4. Now, let's say this is Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, now, what I feel is happening is that, sure, we have this physical object, and this physical object is in this massive cosmic space, and what else is in the massive cosmic space is this physical world. So there's a physical self inside a physical world, and as this physical self moves inside this physical world, it is in some sense having non-physical recordings of the physical. It's as if the brain is translating objective sensory perception into subjective storyline, into subjective character customization. And so pretty much it's like there is the notice that as a separate self moves in a separate world, due to memory, it contains various non-physical recordings I mean, who we kidding, guys? The brain is acting like a camera, and it's also acting like, there's an editing studio in the camera as well, inside the camera. And I should pretty much say, instead of a separate self, I'll say I mean, it is separate, but I'll say as a physical self moves in a physical world. Due to memory, it, instead of contain, I'll say it accumulates. Various non-physical recordings of various non-physical versions of its physical self. So it's as if the body is here to move around, the mind is here to record, not conclude, but to give meaning to how the body moves. Like right now, when I wonder about why do I even care about the mystery of consciousness, why stuff is happening, I see it simply because the mind has become inquisitive. That means when you look at evolution, man was a follower of the environment. Just like you see in, let's say, a blind ideological system where in order people to access it, they have to get rid of their own free will. It's as if what moved us was the environment. And after all this evolution, now the environment can move in our mind. And the way it moves in our mind is by the recordings of the brain, right? So it's as if the brain is creating, is knowing its own existence through how the body changes. How the mind is aware of its own existence through the changes of the body. So when I say is consciousness mapping itself through memory to collectivize? These are all maps. So in some sense, the mind is mapping its body. For example, in what I've drawn here, as A1, let's say A0, A1, A2, A3, A4. You know what it is? It's like we're acting like two types of beings at the same time. That's what's going on. The mind is an additional dimension of being. Now, imagine Here, I'll draw it like this. We have mind, we have body. The body is chronological. And I would use this term, which I don't know, it's not often used, but I use it in my own way, chirological. And in, you can say ancient Greece, ancient Greek thought, there was two views on time. There was, for example, the chronological time, where it was like, you know, the days are passing by, we're getting to tomorrow, the calendar testifies, and then there is kairos, which kairos was how the ancient Greeks considered a sort of divine time, or the right time to do something, right? And so you can totally see how they concluded that sense of another sense of time, because they believed in gods, because they believed gods were walking on a cloud when God intervened, you know, and there was some sort of, let's say, unknown Jungian synchronicity. It was like kairos in motion. You know, it's as if like the universe is behaving as if there's a time for the body and there's a time for mind. Now, the way I'm using the term chirological is in some sense that, so the body is experiencing from, let's say, A to B to C to D. Or here, I'll draw it like this. Metaphorically, it would be like a natural number set. But for Kairos, the way the mind is behaving, instead of the mind going from 1, 2, 3, 4, like just going consecutively forward, it would be here. It would be as if this is how our brains are behaving, which is another way of saying that the mind is being all of itself at the same time. The body I don't know, no. Okay, let me see how else I could say this. So, you know, what is the body experience? I was in moment A, I went to moment A1, I went to moment A3, a sort of, you know, self-jumping. But the mind seems to be that it is aware of multiple selves at the same time. Like right now, as I'm speaking to you, my body is just in this moment of time. It's like 12:09 p.m. My body's just here in this moment, right? But my mind, even though I'm existing in June 27th, 12:09 p.m., but my mind can imagine yesterday, it can imagine the day before, it can imagine so many different periods of time. It's as if the mind has no issue time traveling to the past, but the body cannot. You know, the body is like how we are actually stationed in the present. You know, it's like our mind is behaving like a multidimensional being, and our body cannot be anything more than a singular dimensional being if we have an elemental understanding of it, right? Right now, they are in some sense trying to use light to move the neurons, certain neurological movements currently are trying to use light to move neurons and in some sense turn certain neurons on and off as a creature, let's say like a rat or something, is doing certain movements to recognize in some sense, okay, Is the consciousness fully dependent on the brain, or not just only on its manifestation? The issue is this is my prediction as, let's say, a scholar of the mind, of the mysteries of the mind. I feel that we are antennas, and there is no soul inside a body. The body is found inside an awareness of mind, I'll say that again. The known body is found in, let's say, the known consciousness of the mind. Okay? We know that the body has content. We know that the mind can have content, but also in, for example, deep sleep, the mind doesn't have content. The body still exists, but the mind doesn't know it exists. It's as if the person's like, the whole day I was aware of the day, but when I slept, it was as if like I just vanished and appeared the next day, right? It's like we are so used to, as a species, to vanish, to exit consciousness and then re-enter it the next day, that we don't even consider its significance. It's like we're like restarting, a biochemical engine, and as it's restarting, we're wondering what is the finger that's pressing the restart button, clicking on the restart. So this is very important, because the mind has an urge to understand itself. You see, like, sure, if let's say the mind is not an object, and let's say the body is an object, the purpose of an object is very obvious. Like, an object wants to just continue existing and just wants to remain as an object. But if the mind is not an object, the question comes, what can a non-physical, what would be the relationship, or what can a non-physical being do with physical being? Pretty much it can be like the mind can be the body, the mind can move the body, can be future projections of the body, or the mind can choose to neither be the body or neither be the projector of the spectrum of time and eventhood upon the body. Like, this might be a ridiculous term, but I wanted to say for a second, like, the mind is sprinkling meaning on a chronological physical movement. Do you know? It's like the body doesn't need another body, but evidently the mind requires its memories, which are versions of itself. So it's technically like we're this unknown attention looking out through biological eyes. As we experience the outer realms, the physical realms, the mind seems to be generating memories, and memories are like pinpoints. They're like we're mapping out. It's like the body knows it's existing, but the mind doesn't know it's existing, so there's a reason for it to record the memory of the body. Right? Now, what's really fascinating is that when I say to collectivize, it's kind of very poetic to be a human being. It's like you start actually from nothing. It's as if like everybody's, past life was non-existent. It's like, who were you in your past life? I was non-existent, man. And so, imagine non-existence, incarnated as existence. It's like, man, who knew emptiness had the potential to become a cosmos? Who knew empty space could have all this stuff in it? You know, sometimes I think, if there was a galactic real estate agent who was like selling galaxies, okay, and imagine, to like incredibly higher dimensional beings, and that galactic real estate agent was like, yes, inside this galaxy, you'll find manifestation that has cooled down after billions of years, and there's a couple of intelligent civilizations who know nothing about anything. And the higher dimensional would being like, I don't know, man, I don't like how it's like the color of the room, I don't like how it's pitch black. Imagine one day we woke up and we realized the sun had changed color. I think scientists would go insane. Like everybody on the planet would be like, what the fuck? So this force, I think this is the most agreeable thing somebody can say. Something that everybody would universally agree, that we are life force. It's like we're alive and we're considering it some sort of force. Now Mr. Within is saying, all right, this force starts off as unknown and then it experiences itself as known. And so it's as if the mind is not convinced it is a body, so the body keeps on living and projecting senses of self. The mind is a storehouse of versions of ourselves. And it's another way of saying, like, the mind is keeping an eye on its own performance. To get back to these questions, oh yeah, I forgot to mention it, to collectivize. So why is some attention through a life force? Why is there a sort of physical being that is non-physically remembering itself to then influence its own choices? It's as if like our brains found a way to interpret life in a sort of container. Right now, I'm wondering, like, who am I? Like, right now, I'm speaking, where do these words come from? They, to some degree, come from how I am existing in the present. They also come from how I have experienced existence so far, which the cool thing about time is that as you go forward in it, the past is not existentially relevant, but the past is experientially relevant. So it's as if all these Mr. Within talks I've given until this moment, imagine, it's as if for me, when I listen to these talks of mine for a sort of quality check and whatnot, sometimes I listen to my own talks and I'm like, man, this guy should stop coughing. But in reality, I know that sound is just sound. Matter is just matter. Space is just space. The title is another way of just saying memories exist to turn the inner viewer into a collective me. The mind is behaving like an awareness to a field of activity. The body is what is moving in this field of activity. It's as if the body is the pen, and the hand that is holding the pen is the mind. The world and empty space and all of this is like the piece of paper. And so it seems like the mind is using the body to, in some sense, write its own poetry. And now the incredible thing is that which is moving the pen, and writers all know this, that the intelligence of the mind that moves the body, the intelligence of the hand that moves the pen, is superior to the piece of paper, to the pen, and in some sense to even the ink. Like the ink is the memory, the pen is the mind. Okay. Oh, excuse me. The pen is the ink is the memory. The pen is the body. The piece of paper is the world, and the hand that is moving it, consciousness is, let's say, that's mind. So it's like pretty much a person being like, wait a minute. It's an unknown mind moving a body, and then because it moves a body and is able to record it, then it establishes knowledge. That means, could there be a potential that the true knowledge of this realm is beyond image? It is beyond characteristics. All of human thinking is limited to a character. Really, all that is human knowledge is how all these human beings that have been born so far have looked at the world. And it's as if some people, they saw something, they said something, they call them philosophers. What is consciousness? Even though the answer is mystery, we can say an agent for change. I ask myself, how is consciousness mapping itself? And consciousness is mapping itself through memory. But the way it's mapping itself is that it is choosing, like, think about it this way. Imagine the mind knows that it has a sort of limited energy before it gets tired and goes to sleep at the end of the day. So the mind knows its time limit of activation, of ability to move in a conscious waking state. So it's as if what is consciousness, another better word would be, let's say, free will. A freedom to be aware. So how is the free will mapping itself? It's like a non-physical intelligence. I don't know how to say it, like, so let's say non-physical viewer is viewing physical scenarios. It is remembering those physical scenarios, and it is contrasting its memories to its most newest recent experience. The mind is here so that we don't forget the word. You know, in a lot of these yogic traditions, they say that the mind, attachment or identification with the mind is suffering. Or attachment leads to suffering and detachment leads to freedom. That means it doesn't matter if you're good or evil, if you're attached to something, you can suffer. But if you're detached, it's as if, what do you suffer from? There's nothing. I feel that we are all, behind our eyes, being one moment of awareness, one, let's say, boundless, universal moment of awareness. And in front of our eyes, how would I say it? I'm saying it, okay, let me rephrase. I notice my body. I ask myself, how do I notice my body? I notice my mind. I ask myself, how do I notice I'm being a mind? And I realize the mind contrasts itself because it says I'm a body. So what is it? It's like the mind is using the body to know it's a body. But it seems like there's this deep, like behind the scenes, in the background, behind the mind, there is, okay, here, I got it. Let me just open a new page. It's like this. It's like body equals visible. Okay? The mind equals invisible, and let's say, for the sake of language, the unknown viewer or the soul equals inconceivable. So to truly understand how the mind is mapping itself through memory, or why the brain cares to remember, why is memory important? That means I could understand that the brain is like some sort of vacuum of sensory information around itself. But in some sense, when it vacuums and when it accumulates information, what it does with the information is the strange thing, right? And so it's like there's a visible body, invisible mind, and an inconceivable soul. There is, imagine, I would say, a dimension where you can apply time. So there's time. Here, I'll say this way. We have space, we have time, and we have shape. Okay? Or sorry, I'll say it this way. For the body, we have space, we have shape. For the mind, we have space, time, and shape. And the coolest thing about the mind, guys, when I say it's invisible, it's as if time is technically invisible. Space is technically invisible. The concept of meaning is technically invisible. When we look at human behavior, it's as if the person's considering they're a subject, and then they're, the subject is moving the object. It's as if somebody says, who are you? And let's say you say your name, you say the idea that you believe yourself to be, and then you realize it's as if it's like an invisible subject known as the ego is moving a visible object. Okay? This is like the hilarious thing about the ego. Some person was like, it's like, I have suffering, and then the enlightened guru was like, it's your ego, man, get rid of your ego, And then the disciple or whatever is like, how do I get rid of the ego? I can't find it. And the guru laughs and he says, that's when you have started to notice that to get rid of a visible problem, that's easy. To study something visible is super easy, but to study something invisible means that you have to wonder if the visibility that you're first reacting off to consider the invisible is not there. It's not the real value. Right? It's as if here, I'll draw something here. Or you know what I would say, guys. The body is not aware of, it can't fathom space. So I'll just adjust this for a second. So the body identifies with shape. The body doesn't understand time. The body is just existence in a moment. The mind is what is creating the concept of time due to memory. And the mind for now seems to be a projection of the brain, but I would say that it is actually the mind is is like how our eyes are can access the information of another dimension and then activate that information, right? So I would say the body identifies with shape, the mind identifies with shape and time, but in actuality there is space here as well. Okay, so the mind is like when we speak, we're like, yo, look at that person's mind. But when we are silent, it's as if, what mind? Where's the mind? You see, it's in our animation as creatures that the mind becomes applicable. This is why the yogis were so smart. Meditation is like the most genius capitalization on a glitch in the matrix of a simulated reality from within. The relationship of the visible and invisible. This is another way of saying love and loss, Pretty much that's what's going on. The mind is a viewer of the body. The body is what is being viewed. When the body changes, the viewer doesn't necessarily change. There could be this argument made that every human being from the beginning of their life have actually been an attributeless, changeless, witnessing moment. It's as if we're like this sphere, this glass. Imagine we're this sphere, and inside the sphere we find a body inside a world, and it's like how it's contained. Knowledge is a relationship of the visible with the invisible. True knowledge is the relationship of the invisible with the inconceivable. The inconceivable is again the changeless witness that was the beginning of everything. That means the world began when the mind began. When the mind began, it's as if like a person goes back to their earliest memory. They try to remember their earliest memory. Then they're like, who was viewing my earliest memory? That means who was I before I had my first memory? The illusion is how we think the known was in here before the unknown. The unknown was in the room. The honesty of mankind is not the acknowledgement of what it knows. It is the acknowledgement of what it doesn't know. Socrates says the only true wisdom is to know that you know nothing. Why would Socrates say this? And how could we see this applying to the species? It's not like a person should be like, oh my God, what I don't know is way more than what I know, so I should be humble. Like instead of that person having that attitude, now imagine a species that is so convinced of its own shape and implications and meaning, right? I see so many professors from universities like talking about, not so many, but there are some who are like talking about meaning and understanding and all of this, and they don't realize the mind of the species has been shackled by the past. And true liberation means that we have to take out the past furniture and then bring in new furniture into the room, or in some sense, we go find a new room. Right, the future generations. The biggest question I think every great scholar on the earth has deep down have had this challenge, where they're like, how much should the voice of the past, occupy the ears of the future? And the idea is that if we truly live well, our silence will be their beginning. Right? When I say our silence, that is the end of greatness. Greatness is not like, a warrior on a battlefield holding a sword towards the sky, and it's like an endless march into infinity as a sort of victorious force of a species. It's as if we started, let's say, imagine you started as a species and you ended up as, in some sense, a sort of galactic force. Right? That means instead of us being like, oh man, where are the aliens? Let's hope aliens come and save us. Instead of that shit, the whole species should be as if we will reach a point where we will become the most advanced species in this universal sector, and we will go to the other planets, and we will become, emissaries of universal compassion. But the species is still in individual conscious games. That means human beings, and it's very challenging because it's this weird thing that has happened on Earth, where, this is my opinion, I guess, that the internet came too soon. It's as if a creature had to develop biologically before having access to lots of information at the same time, right? Now the information access has come early, so the urge towards being a physical being is becoming less and less, and the future generations are gonna find excuses to be comfortable as minds. And the challenges of all those people who care for the future now is, how do we advance civilization in a way where our physical, biological purpose does not get diminished, and we recognize, you know what it is? It's as if, like, imagine the greatness of all worlds wanted to gift the body something, and it was like, okay, I gift the body worldhood, right? It's like the body was gifted existence, the mind was given a gift of infinity, and the soul was in some sense that the one giving the gift. You see, this is some moments I'll tell you. I tend to at least look at myself as if like nothing bothers me ever, usually. Or if something bothers me, I analyze it I wonder about it to such a degree that I find humorous angles in it, and it doesn't bother me. But I would say some moments I've had in this life where I have felt I have felt not just incapable, not just, uh, it's as if the moments where I felt that my being was fake. When maybe I should use different things. There's been moments where I have felt like my mind was being overwhelmed by my karma. Okay, so imagine a human being being like, yo, this karma is too intense, and the intensity of the karma made me first wonder about analyzing it, but then when the analysis had limits, right, I reverted in some sense to emotions, and then from the emotion there was a reversion to truth, right? It's like, believe it or not, as much as I don't really like Freud, but his contributions were, I guess, necessary and important. But when Freud says that there is a sort of, like, how would I say? It's as if when I don't know how to say it. There's been moments where in the outer realms, there was a sort of difficulty, let's say unmanageable difficulty. It was as if my inner self's voice called out to the truth of the cosmos. You know, that's how what I'm trying to explain. That it's as if you're so empty-handed that all that is left is to abide. This is really the great teaching of life. The attention goes through all the moments. It just keeps going through an aeonian journey of lifetimes into now. In some sense, how many ways, and if the mind is beyond the dimension of the body, if you're a Buddhist, you and me, like this title of this episode is going to be heavy, because it means all your lifetimes have been ways, and a field of activity has been trying to manifest itself. And to realize the simplicity of the presence of the viewer is the beginning. It's as if a human being was afraid of death, and death seemed like a complex, scary idea. Then the person suddenly went to the simpler truths of the moment, and then they realized, in some sense, all I have known has been life. We have all been training as living beings from the beginning of our life. We are not just conditioned by ideology, we are conditioned by how we are being an organism. The body filters the value of the unknown witnessing viewer within. From that unknown view, it's pretty much like being like, okay, what is looking through my eyes? And you realize it can't be an object, right? And you realize it can't be subjects, because subjects come and go. The body changes. It's as if, how do we know we're not the body? Because the body changes. It's not the same body, right? It's as if we're like this awareness, and this awareness is aware of, it's like we're inside like a transforming Iron Man suit, Ah. It's as if it's as if somebody was like, "Oh my God, the oceans of the world are drying up," and so that person started to cry, right? That person cried so much, imagine that it's like the oceans returned to their normal level, you know. And then the people were like, "Are you done crying?" And the person's like, "Oh man, immortal tears could be a thing, guys. You know, who knows?" We get a species to cry to increase the ocean levels. Oh man. 100% if somebody cries that much, it's gonna be like a sort of calcium deficiency, I think. Anyways. This is the body. Let's say this is the mind. The body is spiraling. And in some sense, becoming a mind. And enlightenment is when this spiral goes back to the center. It's like the visible and the invisible. It's like the yin-yang circle. And the circle is poetically the inconceivable soul. It's kind of brilliant the way existence is happening. It's like we know that we can know, but we don't know how to know. You know, sometimes I have this yearning to just go on top of a mountain peak and play like a bamboo flute. You know? Consciousness is activity oriented. Awareness is prior to the activity. It's as if like what is aware that it is aware. The awareness of awareness. the awareness to consciousness, and then the consciousness to shape. So if the mind is creating a map, a person, imagine this map is again like an iceberg. I shouldn't say again the first time I'm saying iceberg. So imagine this is an iceberg, right? And so this is like the conscious mind. And this is, let's say, subconscious, unconscious. So technically our brains, if we consider that individualism is what originates consciousness, that means like beyond the tip of the iceberg, that is the ego, the brain is actually holding so many versions of every moment to itself beyond a humanized perspective. So it's as if the brain is I shouldn't say the brain, but the mind is not, I shouldn't say, how would I say, the mind is trying to realize how it's being everything, but the body is something in everything. So it's as if like the potential of everything is using something to realize it is the actuality of everything. It's like our minds are mapping themselves through memory, which are instances of ourself, in some sense to be able to identify as a moving body. What is movement? Movement is a potential that is actualized. Potential energy, kinetic energy, becomes kinetic energy. In the subtitle, I've written to be or not to be collective. This is a sort of, I guess, mini tribute to Shakespeare, where he said to be or not to be, and now it's like the moment we realize the mind is a collective space, into collectively intelligent space, you know, and the body is like, you know, an individually intelligent form in that particle, in that space, in that field. It's as if the options are, should we become eternal space, or should we be a temporary matter, temporary object? Subjects are just extended attributes to the object. You know, in reality, we are neither a subject or an object, and this is where, wherever you are, you suddenly realize in the middle of the void, a species began talking over itself, or I shouldn't say over itself, began talking to itself. We are a species talking to itself through individual means. We are a collective force. A collective, we are technically, if you identify a space, then we're being the space of being. The mind's purpose is to realize the inseparability of the individual activities of the body, and I would say the collective presence of the world. So the greatest achievement of the mind is to become the consciousness of the world. The greatest achievement of the body is to, in some sense, return to the world. So it's like our body returns to the world and our mind becomes the world, and then individualism, it's as if you know, it's like you reach a point where, just like an Xbox achievement, suddenly comes reincarnation unnecessary. In the subtitle, I also say, is the mind acting like a collective being? I mean, to me at least it is. But what would a collective being behave like? Perhaps we can say the microcosm is the behavior of the macrocosm. So it would appear as this. You know, it's hilarious. The mystical journey seems to be a round circle, but the second time you go around, you're not a conditional entity, you are an unconditional presence of being. This is, I would say, where true freedom is. True freedom is in how we are being. And so an advanced civilization deserves the greatest clarity. You know, the advanced civilization is another way of saying the most important idea on earth. For the physical, for the most important idea in the outer realms, in the outer earth. The inner earth is in some sense every person. How would I say it? Every person's eyes provide them or gift them with their own unique position in the space-time continuum. We're reaching a time in human history where philosophers of the future generations are tasked. They are tasked in wondering how the individual consciousness may transfer into collective modalities, into collective awareness. In yogic thought, they pretty much say that there is the observer, there is the observed. Everybody has these two dimensions. Now, in yogic thought, what they're trying to do is they're trying to tell you, this is, let's say, body, known body, visible body, invisible mind. So they are in some sense, like in yogic thought, they're saying pretty much what all these enlightened folks are trying to do is they're saying that when you get rid of the observer, so when you realize that you're not the object because you're observing it, so when you are not a subject plus not an object, this equals a space where truth instantaneously is realized as one is being. So it's a state beyond knowledge. And so the realization, I would say, at least to my capability, how nothing is being nothing before anything can become anything. And the nothing is a life. Right now we're experiencing the life of the world, you know. But the life of nothing would be in some sense how you are sight, empty seeing. Is consciousness mapping itself through memory to collectivize? It seems that that is the only option it has. Like the mind has been there, done that in regards to being an object, in regards to being a subject moving the object. Now, it's like, what else can this unknown viewer attain? This realization of the simultaneity of the movement of objects and subjects. This is another way of saying the natural world is going through a phase that I would say in the next 100 to 200 years, the great performances of human beings with synchronized inner realms and outer realms will occur. And in some sense, as the future dawns, the pilots of consciousness arrive. That means it's like, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I do feel pretty lonely when I give these talks, but I shouldn't say lonely, I feel a sort of solitude, because anybody who talks about the future hasn't arrived. There's a sort of, there's the sort of loneliness of feeling you're seeing something that hasn't happened yet. It's as if, I don't know how to tell you, I shouldn't say loneliness, it's a sort of actually awe-inspiring solitude. Right? It's as if like recognizing, I don't know how to say it, but anyways. The search, or I shouldn't say search, but an attempt for space to detach from the objects and the subjects. And it's another way of saying that when the body realizes it is just an antenna and the mind is the signals of the antenna, the curiosity of the individual automatically goes to the soul. And if the soul is another word for inconceivable, so it would be as if you're going towards the origin of your mind, which is inconceivable to the mind if it's considering a cause and effect relationship. An advanced civilization honors all bodies in the realm, all physical creatures. An advanced civilization honors all potentials of invisible minds. That means if right now, as I'm speaking, there are, let's say, invisible beings or invisible eyes, looking at my visible moment, it's like, I don't know how big my audience is in the cosmos. Like, YouTube gives me analytics of, the Earth on, like, let's say, cyberspace of the Earth plane. But I would say how the worlds are watching themselves is like, beyond fathoming. And if there were invisible eyes listening to a visible voice, I would say that the journey has led to the moment where species no longer feared the void, where species no longer feared the singular, where it no longer feared the dual, it no longer feared the infinite. And so as the ring of the absent heaven was worn and taken off at the same time, it's like realizing the world is performing in front of you, and the performance of the world leads to our performance in it. The more life there is in the moment, there's more engagement. The poet Rumi, he has this quote where it's been on my mind in so many moments, where he says, wherever you are, be the soul of that moment. That means be the inconceivable origination of force. That means this is like true free will, where the freedom is unconditional, the will is conditional, right? So it's like unconditionally you can be in any condition. The mind has an ability to turn the moment into a hell or into a heaven, it's like poetically one can say, space is the eyes of God. And so, what is looking throughout your eyes, dear listeners? Thank you for listening. Much blessings and namaste.